There we go. Bro, I think I've done all the housekeeping stuff. We're here this morning to talk about joint cultural needs assessments. I'm not going to go into loads of detail to talk about those because we've got some of the experts here ready to talk about it with Jonathan Neelands and Mark Scott from Warwick Business School. Um, but I just wanted to pick up really kind of where some of this work has gone, or where it's come from, really. As part of our work as an investment principles support organisation for Arts Council, we convene a regional network of cultural compacts across the West Midlands. So kind of a network for them to work with, learn, support each other, and think about kind of the role that culture has to play in place. And one of the pieces of work that people may be aware of last year now that we launched was our growth inquiry into the kind of the future of cultural investment in the region. That was really looking at what really, not necessarily economic value and all of these bigger questions, but what has the investment in the region been in terms of culture and where is it kind of predicted to go? We showed that the sector is a growth sector, and we also showed that there were lots of things where investment, for example, hadn't kept up pace with inflation, and there were some real challenges facing the sector as well. We launched that down at Parliament in January 2025. And one of the recommendations that we made from that inquiry, and there was lots of different ones, I'd encourage people to take a look at it if they haven't seen it, was really supporting compacts to undertake joint cultural needs assessment in each of their places. And over the past, I was about to say year, it's probably been a bit less than that. We've been working with or piloting with a couple of different places in the region this approach to joint cultural needs assessments. We think they're a really powerful tool, really for kind of making the case for culture in place as well. But I will hand over to Jonathan and to Mark, and I will let them tell you all about it. Do ask questions and do engage in the chat as well. And yeah, lovely to see you all. Over to Jonathan and Mark.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm Jonathan and I'm working with Mark. I'm going to do most of the presenting, but Mark's going to be busy in the chat. If you want to raise any questions in the chat as we go along, Mark will be covering that off, and we will leave questions. You say that we say that we're specialists, but we do have experts by experience on this call. So we have colleagues from Sandwell and from Stoke and from Worcester who've all been working on JCNAs at the moment. So they understand it from the other side of it. So it'll be interesting to hear their views. And guys, you can either chat up at the end, or if we go to the slides that relate to you and you want to say anything about them, then please interrupt and and tell folk how you're getting on it with it and what these slides mean to you and whether they've offered any insights, that kind of thing. Is that okay? So let's get started then, Mark. This is really JCNA 101. I mean, we're just taking you through some basics. The document itself, in hindsight, is a bit over complex and difficult. So we're doing a number of these presentations in order to try and simplify it and make them more accessible. The first original joint cultural needs assessment guidelines were published in 2019, just before COVID, and we did those with a number of cities. And then not last year, Arts Council England and Local Government Authority commissioned us to do a revised, updated version of the JCNA, and you can see there some of the places that are either currently or historically have completed JCNAs as part of their planning. So if we move on to the next slide, Mark. So the JCNA, its origins are in a joint strategic needs assessment. So every local authority has a statutory responsibility for producing a joint strategic needs assessment, which sets out an action plan for how services will collectively focus on needs. Health needs, but also those other needs which impact on health, like education, other demographic information, housing, transport, other kind of challenges which impact on health. So the JCNA sets out how all the services will work together. Now, of course, the one service that's not included in that is public culture, which is why we are suggesting that we need to have a joint cultural needs assessment to sit alongside. Ideally, we shouldn't need to do that. Culture should be one of the services that is making a promise to work together to alleviate the community's needs. And if you look at the Coventry example, if you look at the JCNA text, with anticipated growth in older people, there is need to focus on preventative health amongst the working age population, for instance. If you're a cultural person, you should be putting your hand up and saying, well, culture can do that. Culture can make a contribution to do that. And when you're talking about utilising community assets to help address specific needs and present opportunities for residents to actively get involved, again, you're thinking, well, culture can do that. Culture can make that kind of contribution. So that's what we're looking at. It's really important to say from the outset that the joint cultural needs assessment. Maybe move on to the next slide, actually, Mark. Anthony being nervous has made me nervous. I will calm down in a minute and slow down, and everything's going to be fine. But no. So let's get to the joint cultural needs assessment. It was really important to say from the start, this is not a cultural strategy. A cultural strategy may well align with a joint cultural needs assessment, but this is not a cultural strategy. What this is a commitment by culture to contribute to the key priority outcomes for a place, which may not be cultural. They may be health, they may be economic, they may be to do with civic pride, they may be to do with social cohesion. And what culture is saying is these are the ways in which, by the cultural sector working together, we can make a difference to those priority outcomes that are the really key ones for place. And otherwise, what you see is what you get. So joint working together, no single stakeholder, no single cultural stakeholder or civic stakeholder can make this change happen. It's only by working together and collaborating and focusing they've got any chance of creating any kind of change. But the purpose of JCNA obviously is also to maximise art and culture investment. The argument being that if we go to elected members who may not care at all about culture but do care about mental health, for instance, amongst young adults, and we can show that culture can make a difference, can positively benefit those who are challenged by mental health issues, then it's more likely that culture will get invested in for what it can do. Do you understand what I'm saying? Right, moving on. So the JCNA is basically a seven stage plan, and the logic of it is really important. People who've gone through the process agree that it's the logic that you've got to stick to, however simple or complicated your JCN ends up being. It is this logic, and it's a logic that underpins, other cultural processes like bidding for City of Culture, bidding for Towns of Culture. It's a very similar pattern, but it's got some important stages in it, which we will talk about. So it obviously begins with your place's story. What makes your place distinctive? What makes it extraordinary? What makes it special, unlike anywhere else? Not generic, but specifically Sandwell, specifically Worcester, specifically Stoke in terms of the people who are in this room. And that's partly a story that's told in prose, but it's also a story that's told in numbers, as we will look. How well do you know your place? And whose story is it? And how many different stories might be told? And what are the real challenges that the place faces? To be really, really clear about all of that. And then the next stage is to look at, and often that place narrative doesn't need to be developed from scratch. You may well have done it as part of your cultural strategy or other cultural work you've done. It may well have been done by the local authority if they've got, a one Stoke plan or a one Sandwell plan, or there's a strategy, 10-year strategy or whatever. There's probably a narrative contained in that which you can base your work on and develop it and refine it, but you don't need to start from scratch. Place outcomes are, what are the key priorities for your place, as we've said, and these are generally not cultural outcomes. These are broader, wider, bigger than those, but which are the ones which you feel that, and we will go through some of these examples, which are the ones that you feel that culture can make a strong contribution to. The next stage, stage 3, is the really important one. And that's mapping out and really understanding what cultural resources do you have? What cultural strengths have you got? What can we build on? What's your capacity? Because when we move on to stage 4, which is to think about, so what are the cultural outcomes that contribute? You've got to make those proportionate to the capacity. If you've got a very small cultural sector, very small infrastructure, you can only do so much. And what it's really important to do is to over deliver, right? Not under deliver on what you're saying that you will do. That we've got to be realistic about what it is that you can do, and also to have a better understanding of how united is the cultural sector. If you've got a cultural compact, then you're probably used to very working together and having strong relationships amongst you. But if not, how willing are individual stakeholders in the cultural sector to work together, to put their self-interest on one side and combine to work on a bigger common good, which is related to the JCNA. And when you've decided what you have the capacity to deliver, then you define what the cultural outcomes are. So if there's these are big place outcomes, what cultural outcomes will contribute? What will culture do that will make a difference to the key needs that's been identified in your place? And that then obviously leads to, well, if that's what the change that we imagine, if that's the change that we see, then what will we need to do? What will we need to produce? What activities will we need? Who will take responsibility? How will we move it forward over the next 7 months, 18 months, whatever your timeline is? And then finally, how will we measure progress in learn? So if you're saying culture can make a real difference, then how will we know it's made a real difference? How will you be able to measure that? So that's the 7-point plan. And as I said, it's quite important to keep to logic. Even if you're doing quite a simple JCNA, the logic of it is quite important and has proved successful for the number of places that have done that. Okay, next slide. So it is important to look at what data is available to you to support your story, both in terms of, the story of who you are. Well, how do we know that? What's your population? Are there any, what's special about your demographics? Is there anything special about your ages, about levels of deprivation, about levels of diversity, about pockets of inequality? What the numbers, what story doesn't do numbers tell? And we'll look at some examples of that in a minute. But these are the kind of sources of data that you might bring together. And much of this has actually been provided for you if you're working in the West Midlands through the West Midlands Research Project. And Mark, I'm going to ask you just to talk about the sources of data that we used when we were working with Sandwell. So Mark, if you just talk us through that, and Matt, if you've got any comment on them after Mark, then that would be really helpful as well.
Yep. So first of all, when we were looking at Sandwell and the same with Worcester and Stoke, when we were preparing the data for those JCNAs, we started with the population data. So first of all, who lives in the place, who they are, what demographics are they, what needs do they have? So we use a lot of population data, which obviously comes from the census, some of the index of multiple deprivation data, which was updated in November last year. And we also look at things such as the community life survey to get what people feel about their local area and how they live in their local area. But we then also look at with more place-specific data. So with places like Sandwell, we started with the Sandwell Joint Strategic Needs Assessment. So they have a lot of data on public health through Sandwell Trends, which is their insight team at the council, and we're able to then start piecing together what are the priority needs, how does that relate to the population data. Once we've taken that, we then take wider data from various other strategies that are taking place, such as tourism, visitor economy, mental health strategies, but then also bring that together with cultural data. And that cultural data is participation data, which if you're in the West Midlands is available through the Creative West Midlands project. But if you're not in the West Midlands, is also available through the DCMS participation survey, 23-24 down to the local authority level. Cultural jobs, cultural metrics from which use DCMS, SIC and SOC code. So we're bringing all of these different data sources together to come up with a picture of a place.
Yeah. And the cultural data also, if you're not in the West Midlands, look at the Arts Council Culture and Place Data Explorer also will give you that kind of information. We said about the importance of working jointly earlier on, and that's where this starts to become really important, because if you're looking at that top left-hand corner and being frightened by it, there'll be people working in your local authority who will know and use that data regularly. So that's why it's important to have a strong relationship with the local authorities so that they can do some of this work in helping you with the data. I don't know, Matt, did you want to just say something about that or?
Yeah, I think Mark summed it up really well. It's been really useful having your support in terms of helping us wade through what is a lot of data, and pull out some really compelling data points that can support what we already know as well, around the borough and where culture can contribute. So yeah, it's been really useful, and we are quite fortunate in Sandwell that there is the Sandwell Trends resource and team. So they've already done a lot of that sort of synthesis of the data to get to the key headlines, which really helps. Yeah, but yeah, it's
Okay.
it's really interesting. I think we need to definitely strengthen that relationship, as you say, Jonathan, with the
Yeah.
data team.
That's great. And I mean, just a reminder to us all that every other service starts with data and evidence. Health starts with data and evidence. So that when other services make decisions about what to invest in, what to spend scarce resources on, they do it based on evidence and data. So all we're saying is culture should be doing the same. Culture is also a public service, so the investment in culture should also be based on the evidence and data that's available, not just on what we think it should be spent on where we think it should be spent on, but what does the data tell us? So if we move on to the next one, Mark. So here is some of that story in numbers that we presented in Sandwell this week. So we know that it's growing fast at a time when most places are not. So that's an interesting one. We know that it's young compared to the rest. We'll make all these slides available to you, so don't try and stress you reading all the text. We know it's growing fast. We know that it's younger. We know that it's super diverse. We know that there's a range of languages spoken. And we also know that health outcomes in Sandwell are worse than anywhere else in the country. Now, as a cultural worker, you will begin your own cultural story by combining growing fast, young, super diverse. Most common languages are Punjabi, Polish, Bengali, and poor health outcomes. We're beginning to, from that story told by numbers, you'll be beginning to already to think about what that means for cultural activity and for cultural delivery. And the next one. I'm going to look at, so you click them all through, Mark. And this is from Worcester, who worked with Katie Rains at Indigo to help them with some of this data processing. And again, it tells a story. It's more deprived than 50% of English local authorities, and that's to do with areas of inequality. It's a social mobility cold spot, so very low, poor qualifications. Two-thirds of neighbourhoods have become more deprived, and 8 areas in Worcester contain the highest level of deprivation, and food bank usage has been a 10% increase. Now, as an outsider, I had a view of Worcester which is not reflected in these numbers, and that's the point. I didn't imagine that there was the depth of inequalities in Worcester that this evidence revealed. I didn't imagine that where that deprivation was would be on the periphery of the city, not in the centre of the city. So there are all kinds of things which data, and if you're applying to me for funding, I may have, I have that view of Worcester. So what you're doing by providing me with this evidence is shifting my perception of Worcester and what its needs are and what its investment decisions need to be. Philip, I didn't know if you wanted to make a comment about that.
I think you're absolutely right, Jonathan. I think one of the most interesting bits of the process for me so far has been where we got together as the cultural compact to look through this data, and actually the conversations that we had around that table at that point about exactly how, I mean, we've had these conversations, we've gone through quite a lot, haven't we, about how Worcester looks terribly average when you just look at overall statistics. But actually going into this kind of depth enabled us to really look at where different areas were not performing in the ways that the overall stats looked like we were. And then those conversations around the table then enabled us to really pull out what the priorities could be. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead, so I'll shut up at this point and let you go.
No. We will certainly come to those as well. Okay, let's have a look at the next slide. And then obviously this is a data to do with mapping out the cultural sector and its capacity. And again, these statistics hide stories, they hide lived experience, they hide local knowledge, but they are stark. And if the cultural compact sits down and looks at this infographic, it's just very helpful in looking at where the weaknesses are, where the gaps are, where the strengths are. So it's a very small cultural sector, so there's only so much you can promise. There's a huge outflow of creative talent from the city, so that feels like a priority both for the city and for the cultural sector to do something about that, or to attempt to do something about that. And interestingly, 66%, so there's over 80% of Worcester residents who attend a cultural event, which is within the West Midlands range, Mark. Yeah, yeah, but two-thirds of those were outside Worcester. So they are taking part, but they're not taking part in Worcester. So what are we, what's the Worcester offer? What do we need to do to make the Worcester offer more visible? And we know that we need to make it more visible because 48% of residents said there's a lack of information about what is on. That 66% with the two-thirds outside Worcester is very interesting. I can't remember what the Sandwell one was, Matt, but it was also mostly out of the borough, wasn't it? Whereas Stoke, 87% are within the borough. So why is everybody staying in Stoke to have their cultural offer and not in Sandwell and not in Worcester? So these are problems then for the cultural sector, cultural compact to wrestle with and make some sort of sense with, and be aware of the reality of that, and what can you expect to change, and how by increasing, for instance, cultural participation, can you also address public health needs? And how do you combine what the cultural sector needs to do in order to grow and to be strong and to be, make a really visible contribution to their place? How can you also at the same time contribute to wider cultural outcomes?
But just to add very quickly on event attendance outside of the local authority, is it comes down to a few issues around cultural infrastructure. So, for instance, Sandwell being very close to Birmingham and the infrastructure that's in Birmingham, people will travel to Birmingham. Also, when we asked the question in the Creative West Midlands project, it's not an exact science. We targeted people in local authorities, but if they live towards the border of a local authority where it's easier and quicker for them to go to the neighbouring authority, that may have influenced the question. But we tried to control that as much as we could.
Yeah, and the compact will go through that. I mean, Matt, the Sandwell compact knows that because they live there. They have lived experience of place. So when they're looking at this data, they're also bringing a different level of insight into what that data is telling them because they're linking it to what they know, what they know through their experience of the place. It also throws up interesting challenges, which you might not otherwise be aware of unless you go through this data. So the next slide. So we have this really interesting one, didn't we, Philippa, in Worcester. Do you want to just explain those, Mark, because you've got the data sources better than I have?
Yeah. The Royal Society for Arts a few years ago, I think 2016, did an initial heritage index, which they revised in 2020, which basically ranked local authorities about from top to bottom across the entire country based on the number of heritage assets they had, the funding for heritage assets, and if their heritage assets were being utilised as strongly as they possibly could be. And in terms of the heritage ranking, Worcester came out as 5th for the number of heritage assets it had. However, it was 188 for heritage activities taking place. So whilst it had some of the highest number of heritage assets per population within it, the actual engagement with it was incredibly low.
And I'll ask Philippa to comment on this because it's just interesting. Oh my goodness, it's really, really high up, but we're not, people are not engaging with it. They're not. There's not enough. I'm not quite sure why that might be. On the other hand, Worcester wants to tell a story that moves beyond its past. So of course the heritage is important, but it doesn't want to be seen as a heritage place because it's growing, it's young, it needs to have a dynamic future, and it needs to have a future projection. So how do you marry up these two bits of data with who you are and who you're becoming, Philippa?
This one is really interesting, and I've started trying to dig a bit deeper into this information. And Mark, I might ask you to help me a bit more on this one because so some of it absolutely reflects Worcester's pride in its heritage, and we have a particularly large local listing, for example. You know, an awful lot of the kind of the strategic view about heritage in Worcester has been recording, making sure that it's publicised, making sure that it's on lists, all of those kind of things, which is, I think, why absolutely we are in that high heritage assets. And that is something that I think every local area ought to be doing. That's a really positive. The flip side of it, though, I think reflects the fact that we, particularly at this point, I think it is a little bit different since this was done, but when this was done, that we would actually been extremely unsuccessful in grant funding. And so actually we were really down low on the funding from external funders on anything to do with heritage. And I mean, you know, this becomes an incredibly powerful bit of information for then us to go back and say to funders, look, we've got all of this heritage assets here, but we're not able to improve the engagement because of the fact that we don't have enough funding locally to do it. So it becomes a very powerful narrative to take forward.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Philippa. You know, if you're going to funders supported by the evidence, if you're going to funders and saying, you know, we'd like to encourage more heritage engagement in Worcester. If you're going to funders and saying we'd like to encourage more heritage activity in Worcester because the data tells us that, and we have a track record that shows us that when local cultural activities take place in heritage assets, they increase whatever. If you're going with that, then you're much more likely, obviously, to get funded than if you don't. The the next stage. Let's move to the next slide, Mark. So we've talked through, you know, what is your story? What do you know? What's the story that numbers tell us? The story that you and the people would tell about yourselves and your future? What are the real priority needs? You know, what is the place seeking to change? What are the problems? What are the key challenges? What's the scale of our cultural sector? You know, how able are we to contribute to change? And then the next thing that comes in the plan is to say what your cultural outcomes are, how your cultural outcomes, what change we will deliver through culture aligned to your big key outcomes or big key impacts that you need our support in challenging. And this is a good example of a beginnings of that from Sandwell. So Sandwell have got a cultural strategy, and now they're doing a joint cultural needs assessment. So for them, it's about how do we align our cultural strategy with the JCNA. For other places, the JCNA has come first, and they've developed the outcomes, and then the cultural strategy is how do we deliver the cultural outcomes. So with all respect to Matt and colleagues in Sandwell have worked really, really hard on this. I want to be a little bit cruel about the wording of these objectives. And we've been through this, Matt, haven't we? So you don't mind me doing that.
Yeah, I won't cry.
Okay, all right.
Just to say as well, you know, that these slides that Jonathan's going to go through are us trying to reduce down what was in various cultural strategies to something to focus on and then to look at the data. So it's been really helpful with Jonathan going through them.
Yeah, there's no challenge at all. It's a reality, and this is what we do. So one of the key priorities for Sandwell is to do with place and regeneration, as you might imagine. So this cultural strategy work has already thought about, well, how might culture make a contribution to that? So we've got cultural activity can improve residents' perceptions and pride in their place. It can animate high streets and local green space with activity, artwork and performance, bring cultural heritage and business assets to life through maximise the potential of Sandwell's public buildings, including libraries, museums, and making most. And that's quite a comprehensive response to the challenge of how can culture contribute. But it's not in the language that's going to make any difference to officers or elected members who are not coming from a cultural background. They're very culturally expressed, and I'm going to be very rude because we all do the same. To a non-cultural person, they come across as a bit fluffy, and a bit not really determined. You know, cultural activity can improve. All right, great. Well, is it, you know, I want to see cultural activity does improve. You know, you need these kind of definite statements, and those statements or outcomes, you're trying to describe what change will look like. If we have the cultural investment and we produce and we do these things, this is what change will look like. This is the actual change, not an aspiration, not an aim, not a dream, not an ambition. This is what change will look like, and we'll be held to account for it. So that's what you're trying to find the language to express. So I haven't done this in any great detail. It certainly won't be what I'll be recommending to Sandwell that they take on, but just simply by putting this slide into AI and asking it to turn it into the kind of outcomes language that's used in local authority and funders' decision making, we get the next slide. Increased pride in place and positive perception of town centres. Increased use of high streets, public spaces and cultural venues, stronger use of culture and heritage assets to support local economies, public buildings used more actively as community cultural spaces. It's a shift in language, which just makes it more clear and more measurable and more certain of this is the change, this is what culture can do. We can make a contribution in these ways, and we can tell you how we can measure that. And some of that measuring will be not done by the cultural sector, it will be done by the local authority anyway. I mean, as far as possible, you're looking for how does the local authority measure progress in other services and how much of that can you use. But we also had a really interesting conversation, didn't we, Matt, that one of the first steps is for the cultural sector within a place to agree on measuring the same things in the same way, where they do measure things, so that you get some sense of what the collective contribution is, so that you know, so that will be important. And this is much more like sport. You know, when sport puts in for investment, their outcomes are often really as simple as this. You know, we will increase the use of green spaces for physical activity. You know, we will make sure that the sporting infrastructure is more, you know, is accessible to all users. They are better than we are at being very kind of clear and concrete. I don't know, again, Matt, did you want to make any comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic in terms of, you know, as you say, aligning with the language of public health in particular and regen. You've got to speak the language of a local authority, haven't you? And I think it's very easy to go in and say, well, we're going to do more activity on a high street, but why are you doing it, and what will the outcomes be? Is what's going to make the ears prick up of, you know, senior leadership in a local authority. And I think, Jonathan, you mentioned in our session about, you know, being very clear that you deliver value. So these, say if it's around public health, you know, that your early intervention work of getting more people to go to an experience culture and participate in it will save the NHS money,
Yeah.
or lead to less referrals or improve mental health.
Yeah.
Things that are very specific and measurable.
Yeah.
I think, as you say, not being woolly and being very, you know, strategic in terms of how you are aligning your activity is vital.
And, you know, we started with what makes your place special. And now we come down to these outcomes. But these outcomes have got to reflect what makes your place special. So one of the interesting asset values in Sandwell is the number of libraries. There's a lot of libraries. There's so many libraries that they look like an easy cut. And yet we've not got very much other cultural infrastructure. So it makes absolute sense to move as much cultural activity as we can into the libraries, in order both to protect the libraries, but also to make sure that every resident in Sandwell has close proximity to cultural activity and cultural activity. Okay, next slide, Mark. Nearly there. So this is an example. Coventry did JCNA about a year ago, maybe a bit more than a year ago. And we've went through the 7-point plan. So it's just giving you like a work through example. So what you're looking at here has not gone to the cultural sector. This has gone to elected members and to the local authorities, Coventry City Council. And Coventry City Council has what they call a One Coventry plan. So it's not just joint services working on public health, but it's combining services around 4 key priority impacts for the city. So of course, culture wants to be part of that. Of course, culture wasn't part of that until it made itself part of that. So if we look at one of those impacts, improving outcomes and tackling inequalities within our communities, there are four outcomes. So this is what the cultural sector says to the elected members, to the authority, we will bring these changes about. These are the changes that we will deliver for you, which contribute directly to your One Coventry plan. What we now need to do is to refresh our cultural strategy. So the cultural strategy refresh will be going back to the cultural sector and saying, these are the JCNA outcomes. This is what we've said we will deliver for the local authority, which relates to their key priority areas. Now we need to work out, what do we produce? What do we do? What are the services? What are the experiences? What are the activities that we now get creative, imaginative, innovative about, and which together will contribute to those changes? And this is quite a challenge for any cultural sector, in my experience, including myself as a challenge. We're very, very good at coming up with activities. Oh, we'll do this, we'll do a festival, we'll do a food work show, we'll do storytelling in libraries, we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll do that. The discipline now is, how will what you suggest, a festival, which one of these outcomes will it contribute to? What you're asking a cultural sector to do is to align everything that they do to delivering these changes. And the understanding that in a time of scarce resources, it's only if you can make that case and deliver that case that you're likely to sustain or even increase investment into the cultural sector. And the final slide. Nope.
That was it.
No, I sent version 3 this morning, and that had the ecosystem slide on it. There's a very elegant ecosystem slide, but it's just a reminder that no one of us can achieve any of this alone. It's only through the power of partnerships, the strength of those partnerships, and the breadth of those partnerships that we can achieve change together. And the breadth is very interesting because both all three of the places that we've worked with, Stoke, Sandwell and Worcester, do have quite broad cultural compacts. In other words, they include health, they include education, they include other non-cultural stakeholders who can support and help them and move them on. I mean, in Worcester, for instance, we went to do a JCNA workshop and we had the deputy leader there for the full 3 hours of the workshop, taking a really active interest. It's only if you've got that strength. Culture sector can't do it on its own. Individual cultural players can't do it on their own. It's got to be about the city coming together. And that will only happen if the ambition is bigger than any one of us. And that's why this, taking the top level priorities for a place and thinking together across the place how we will all work in order to address those challenges and improve life and place and quality of place for our communities, that we've got any chance of having a success. So that's the end of me. I don't know whether any of our experts by experience, Worcester, Stoke or Black Country, want to say anything in response, and then we can open it up for questions if people have questions. You're right, guys. Said what you said. Maybe you want to respond to questions when they come up. I haven't looked at chat. Has the stuff been going on in chat, Mark?
Yeah, just whilst you have a quick look at, there's a few questions in the chat, but I think I just wanted to, and whilst people are having a look at things, just reiterate that point really around the amount of work that kind of goes into a JCNA, but also, it is really big, but actually it's about getting down and focusing in, and things like understanding the data, starting to make a bit of a plan about, all the stuff that Jonathan has said is really important. To kind of get to that point of developing a strategy, developing an approach that's kind of within the capacities that we each have individually and then collectively as a sector. I think, the other just reflection was, and it's come through so many times, is that actually speaks to really what Culture Central is about. I think we can't always work in competition for different pots of funding or say, well, why has that place got this or why has that place got that? Focusing and really understanding the needs of a place is particularly important and goes to that mission, I think, that we have as an organisation about how we can create more opportunities overall through culture for the people and the places of the West Midlands. Just a few little technical bits as well before we get into the questions. I think also if people have got some questions that have come up that we're not able to answer today around specifics around data or what particular things mean if we're talking about indices of deprivation or whatever. For members of Culture Central as well, we are able to kind of help people navigate some of that data stuff a little bit and then direct them towards some extra resources and support that might help as well. So whether that's people like Mark and Jonathan or others as well, in like we've seen with Indigo in some of those places. But I will hand over in case anyone's got any questions. Jonathan, have you had a chance to have a look at the two in the chat?
Yeah, I have. Mark, do you want to start sharing?
Yeah, I just thought I'd share this is the ecosystem that Jonathan was talking about.
Okay. So Claire has a lot of questions. So let's deal with them all. Why wasn't culture integrated in the JCNA in the first place? Because it's on the margins, and because because people don't necessarily understand the value of culture beyond the value of culture, and don't necessarily understand the contribution it will make, and because culture tends not to sit at the top table in local authorities. This is a way of making that happen. I mean, ideally, we should be moving to a point where if we create really compelling joint culture needs assessments, the next round culture will be included in those services. It was always the ambition that the JCNA was a way of getting culture included in the JSNA, because that's where it's most powerfully sat, because that means that whenever health sits down or education sits down or housing sits down, culture is on the agenda in the way that it is, with health across the piece. So that's really important for that. And who needs to lead? I mean, in three places we've worked, it's been a relationship between the local authority and in the three places we work, quite a strong cultural compacts. Now in Warwickshire, that's interesting challenge for you. I understand that. I mean, you can't do it without a local authority, I don't think, because you need access to that data. You've got people working in Warwickshire and working in those other places whose job it is to capture and collect this data because they have to produce the joint strategic needs assessment, for instance, but they also have to, curate data to guide all kinds of other investments in place around housing, transport, roads, and whatever. So having a very strong relationship. I mean, we talked about this, Matt, didn't we? You need relationships at two levels, really. In Sandwell, they've got very good relationships with the senior leadership, but that's not much use in terms of getting things done because senior leadership, are good on strategy and telling you what your strategic advantage might be, but they're not so good at getting decisions and delivery done. So you need to kind of lower down. And certainly if you can get very high up, Worcester, you had the deputy leader there, that was incredible. But you also need somebody working in the data department or somebody working in public health or somebody working in communities who believes in what you're doing and will support you with some of that data work. I mean, how much data you use will again be according to your capacity. The central argument is that you need to find something to support your argument, your narrative, and support your argument for change. So it's just not, otherwise people will turn around and say, well, how do you know that? So you need to be able to respond to that question. It may not be through the depth of data that some places have been able to capture, but you do need to keep saying to yourself, how do I know that? How do I know that? How do I know that? So I think it ought to be culture compacts. I think it ought to be working with the local authority. What support is there to help a new West Midlands area to develop their JCNA? Well, Mark, do you want to talk about what's already there?
Yeah, so in the West Midlands, we've got all of the data from the Creative West Midlands projects, where we've gone to quite a granular level of the local authority level to see what cultural participation looks like, what cultural activity looks like. Do people do it in their local authority? But somewhere like Warwickshire, it's interesting because obviously there's a number of local authorities within Warwickshire beneath the county council level. And within that, if you take Warwick District, for example, where you've got major towns such as Leamington, Warwick, and Kenilworth, you can't disaggregate at those town levels because it's at the district level. But the data is all available on the Creative West Midlands platform, which is you can access it through Culture Central's website, but we've made the data all available for the purpose of doing these JCNAs.
But Claire, I'm more than, you do face a particular challenge, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you, a cup of coffee, when you're ready to do that.
And
But
sorry, Jonathan, just to jump in as well, we've got those local authority profiles. So we've got downloads that you can find for each local authority area in the region on that link that I've just put in. And of course, if people are sort of developing or there are compacts emerging in places as well, we'd really encourage people to join the Compact Plus network. Part of this work has been piloting this approach in these 3 places, but then looking at what the how other places might do this kind of in the future. So I'd recommend, Claire, as well, yeah, speak to or join the Compact Plus network if it's centered around.
But I think it's one of the reasons why we updated the JCNA. I mean, partly because obviously resources are scarcer and scarcer, so you've got to make a more convincing argument of how we all benefit from culture, not just those who actively participate in it. Secondly, because of political changes. So Worcester in a very similar situation where they don't really know what the local government arrangement will be going forward. So they needed a JCNA to prepare for that. And we were also conscious, of course, of there being local authorities with majority governance from parties that might not naturally be inclined to think of culture as being an important asset. As in Warwickshire, which is why what we want the JCNA to be is you may not care about culture, but you do care about pride in place. And so here is how culture will contribute to pride in place. You go to the local authorities, they say to you, right, we're going to cut culture because we really don't care about it, and you're all woke and you're all whatever. And you say, well, what do you care about? We care about health, we care about mental health, we care about pride, we care about social cohesion. Well, here is how we can make a direct contribution to those areas that you do care about. But Claire, I'm more than happy, to talk through the challenges that you have. And you may not be the leader tomorrow, so they are.
Philippa.
Yeah, I just wanted to help a little bit, Claire, with that question about JSNA versus JCNA. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. We've in the museums in Worcester, we've been working with the JSNA for several years, and that really brokering that close relationship between a cultural service and the public health elements, and they have absolutely seen that bridge being built, and as a result, we've been able to access public health funding, and we have museums specifically mentioned within the preventative strategies of the county council. So I think that the two should be seen in parallel and potentially with cross-pollination rather than necessarily that one is better than the other. I do, and this is. I mean, this is probably just my own personal experience here, but I think that the JCNA working has worked very well at a district city level. I think it would struggle at a whole county level. I'd be interested to know how my colleagues in the Black Country and in Stoke have felt about that, because in both cases they're bigger. I feel that a JCNA for the whole of Worcestershire would be much less coherent and snappy than the one that we're putting together for Worcester City specifically.
That's a very, very good point. Sorry, I should have made that. Don't do it for Warwickshire. You've already Bedworth and Nuneaton's needs are entirely different from Stratford's needs are entirely different from. So I think you need to do it on a smaller scale. Sorry, I wanted to draw attention to Matt's point in the chat. One of the biggest challenges it takes the time it takes to engage local authority at different levels. This is why we're keen to hone down our priorities through the JCNA. That's my point earlier, but maybe not so well expressed. You need to work out what your capacity is. You can't do everything. And our instinct is to do everything. I began life as a drama teacher. We taught drama in mobiles on the edge of the playground. Nobody thought drama was important for anything. So anytime anything came up, like literacy, oh yeah, drama can do that. Bullying, oh, drama can do that. We put our hand up to everything just to keep ourselves with a place in the school curriculum. And we do the same with culture because we tend to be on the periphery. It doesn't make any sense. You do much better, as sport does, just to focus on two or three really key deliverables, which make the relationships that you need manageable, which make the data that you need manageable, that make the delivery manageable. And be really happy if you succeed with that. And you'll be respected for saying what it is that you can do and not promising all sorts of things that you can't do. Isn't that right, Matt? Yeah.
But just to add to that, the sports have been incredibly successful in unlocking additional funding through funders who would not even look at sport or culture, because what they've done is they've gone to social impact funders and said, we are going to run this activity, and it's going to do this, and it's going to do this one thing really well. And then they've been able to really evidence that one thing they've said they're going to do, they've done really well, which has unlocked the funding. So there is an opportunity here to, as Jonathan said, not promise the earth in saying we can do all of this, we can do all of this, is really use the JCNA to hone down what the outcomes are, how they link to the place outcomes, and then that could unlock additional funding.
Well, has anyone any other questions or thoughts or things that people would like to dig into a little bit more? We'll give people a second, but any
I know just very quickly, I noticed Kara's on the call. I don't know, Kara, whether you wanted to talk about what data sources are available through the audience agency.
Hello, thank you. I was trying to sort of sneak through with the type. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm at the audience agency, and we work with population data, much of what is mentioned in the JCNA. I was trying to avoid an acronym, but actually we also have ticketing and audience insights as well. So that's layered in through the audience segmentation tool, which might be familiar to some of you. It looks at motivations, it brings in our own cultural participation monitor, panel surveys, and sort of churns it out into these really useful segments of population. We've actually applied it to things like looking at voter outcomes as well. So it doesn't just have its place in culture, very much like Jonathan was saying. It's about where can you see the benefits of culture creeping in. So there's lots of different bits. Actually, I wasn't prepared to share everything, but I can put something in the chat so you can have a look. And more than happy to pick up any conversations on how that might feed into the work. But we have and do use, the needs assessment approach, and at county level, actually, I should add, we. As everybody's pointed out, it is complex to look at all the different needs of a place. So working in Staffordshire County, when we developed their cultural strategy, the approach that we applied was going in and looking at where the strengths were, where there were mismatches. But actually, when you're working at that county level, what is useful is being able to still bring that approach, but it's rather than needs, it's where you can offer that resource and support as well. So you can bring the county together on a wider level. So that's been really useful in the work that we've been doing.
Okay, thanks for that, Cara.
No
Rebecca,
problem.
Rebecca, you have your hand up.
Yeah, it was just a question for Cara, because I know the audience agency's been working on the kind of national data observatory indicator suite. I just wondered how that was going and when that's likely to be sort of delivering, if that's not a cheeky question.
Yeah. So yes, we're working on National Cultural Data Observatory, which is Sorry, I'm just going to plug my laptop in because I'm not high on juice. But the National Cultural Data Observatory is a platform that's been designed to provide data sharing, benchmarking support, but bringing together similar shared insights and language so that there is an overall approach to delivery. I can put something in the chat about that too. It is in development. It's not ready. There is a way in which you can support the manifesto, jump in and get involved. But we've got an event, I believe it's on the 15th of April was the last date that was put out, and we are expecting a report imminently. So it will have more information. Thanks, Anthony. I can see that there. But it is a really useful platform. It's bringing in original data insight, but also we've been working with the Centre for Cultural Value on how you look at the hyperlocal insights as well. So really how the cultural vitality of a place can be measured and supported at hyperlocal and local level. Because it does, once you move out of some of these larger data sets, really picking at that place need at community level is really valuable and important to supporting the work that you do as well. So that it's a really layered piece of work. Footfall data is also being explored, is being put in as well. So thinking about that translation that Jonathan mentioned, culture can seem a bit fluffy. How do we make sure that those hard evidence pieces are in and can be communicated across the different sectors? That's the angle that we're coming in for that as well. But I intended to be here as an observer and a learner today, but more than happy again to pick up anything with anyone. I can share my details. It's all right.
Sorry for pinpointing you, Cara.
It's all right.
I just want to make the point. With the JCNA, the struggle is always around how do we manage the data? How do we get the data? So audience agency is a very useful provider of that. So just for people to be aware of that. But again, it's how much you're able to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the important thing is not to go, we haven't got the capacity, or we're never going to put this data together, so we won't do it. What's important is the logic of the 7-stage plan. That's what's really important. That's what got Bradford City of Culture. That's what got Coventry City of Culture. It's what got Southampton runner-up. It's what got Wandsworth Borough of Culture. There's something in that logic that's very compelling, even if you've only got limited data in order to support it. But you just need all the way through to keep asking yourself the question, how do I know? How do I know? And when you get to the outcomes, how will we know whether that's made any difference or not? And at that point, you go, the metrics, we can't have the cultural sector needing to do all these measurements and whatever. Go and have a cup of coffee with somebody at the local authority and give them that. Oh yeah, well we could do that. We measure that anyway. Oh yeah, well we got that. We do that every annual. Yeah. And you'll find that a lot of the measures, or they'll say, or you can find proxy measures. So it may not be exact cultural measure, but like footfall in the high street, they'll be measuring that because of it, for economic value and because they have to report on it. And if you can show that footfall in the high street increased on days where you had markets or processions or youth theatres rehearsing outdoors, or all of those kind of things.
Amazing, and right on time as well. And just to say thank you so much to Jonathan, to Mark, to Rebecca, to Matt, and to Philippa as well. Thank you for kind of going over the JCNA process, but also sharing some really useful reflections on it as well. I think I'll just reiterate again, that like Jonathan was saying about going and speaking to the person in the local authority. If you're maybe an individual or an organisation that's just starting to work in this space as well, and you remember, please do come and have a chat with us. We can do a bit of demystifying and code busting and starting to steer and help the directions with some of this kind of work around data as well. We'll put the slides from today's session up alongside the YouTube video for it. So you'll see the YouTube video will go up in a couple of days, but we'll also go out in our next newsletter in a couple of weeks' time, and you'll be able to download them from that as well. And then just a final reminder for anyone that hasn't signed up yet, please do think about coming along to our summit Murmuration next Wednesday at the RSC. If you're members, you get free places. If you're not a member, you're able to kind of book on and get a place. Jonathan and Mark will both be there, as well as lots of other people on this call as well. So we hope to see you there. Thanks so much, everyone, for your time today, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to our experts by experience for being put on the spot and being able to respond so positively. So thank you, Matt. Thank you, Philippa. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.